did the character take him somewhere that he didn't anticipate?
I had originally had I had a sense of where this book was going. My first draft of it had a different last 100 or so pages, a different plot twist to it, and it wasn't very good. In fact, the book did not sell because of that. I gave it to a few readers, one of whom pointed out this is not working the second half of the book, and it was too plot-heavy, almost had like a thriller-ish subplot to it, and he advised me to take that stuff out and focus more on the characters and have confidence in the characters themselves carrying the story. So I removed that stuff. I think then I just could, I don't want to sound too new agey about it, but could listen to the characters more dictating where it went, although, let's be honest, it's words on a page, and it's just, you know, it's not like they're real human beings, but you can get into the idea of them being human beings, and occasionally they help you write. And
those were the 100 pages with the zombies, right? Is that kind of how?
Was,
okay,
and
that's gone now.
I had no idea.
Totally gone. We have one in the balcony, Eric. Resources for research.
There were about, I think, 5 distinct fields I really had to learn about: finance, math, computers, Islam, and the Middle East.
So no sweat.
And also 6th, how to write a novel, which I didn't know. So I looked up Wikipedia, how to write a novel. I'll get there. Slow down. There's a book, 5 distinct things you must know about. I would do a combination of books, internet research, friends or experts or strangers who knew more about the subjects than I did, and query them.
And along those lines, do you have any advice for aspiring novelists out there? It can't be an easy process.
Yeah, don't write a book with 5 things you don't know anything about. It takes a while.
Thank you. We'll be here all week.
Yeah.
Do it right here. What kind of a reaction have you received from people who are from the Middle East or are Muslim?
Not a tremendous amount so far. I gave it to a Muslim friend to look over, make sure I was getting everything right. A few people have emailed me who are of Middle Eastern descent or Muslim, and I think enjoyed it. I've yet to get anything, you know, too negative or inflammatory so far, but fingers crossed, maybe someday. Right
down front. The question is, did Dave Edgars have a lot of influence on the novel, because she had noticed some similarities?
I'm a fan of his. I got my start really writing for the McSweeney's website, which he runs. I like his writing. I don't know if maybe you're thinking about like What is the What, or not that one so much, but I mean, in general, he's one of the writers that is a touchstone for me. So perhaps imperceptibly, but I wasn't thinking about how to write an Eggersian novel, or the word Eggersian, which I just made up either.
Which maybe is Curry-esque.
It is.
At times. Do we have more questions? I see one, ma'am. Book club discussion as part of a novel idea, and a question came up as to whether or not Kareem had Asperger's disease.
No, I did not want to pathologize him or give a diagnosis. My thought was that he's someone who is more so dominated by finance and rationality and analytical thought processes that he's somewhat Asperger-like in his affect, but I didn't want to make it that he certainly has this. It feels reductive to me. The book, A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon, is a distinct influence on this book. So that was useful in coming up with how would someone who views life through this lens view New York City, for instance. But I would not say he's got Asperger's or autism. He's just machine-like, mechanical, and he's resisting that throughout the book. And I think the book charts his evolution and his growing humanity and his deepening resistance to some kind of Asperger's-like diagnosis.
So the question is, he was here to work on the Y2K bug, potentially. Why did Teddy have him leave in the story before the big event?
You've uncovered quite the plot hole, haven't you? Got me out. I can justify by saying he's no longer on the Y2K project by this point, so he's out of it for that reason. It felt much cleaner to me to have him leaving then. Ideally, maybe in some version of the real world behind this, all his work has been done by that point. He doesn't need to be around anymore by the time the clock turns over. But never talk about that again to anyone.
It's our little secret. Yes, sir. What are you reading now?
I read mostly novels and news stuff. I brought the book, David Foster Wallace's The Pale King, with me on this trip. I've yet to crack it open. In this past year, I really liked Room by Emma Donoghue, Skippy Dies by Paul Murray. I like James Hines's book Next, a few others as well.
So Teddy has been asked to describe a typical writing day for him, including the tools that he uses to get his words down onto paper, from his head down to paper or computer.
I use a special extendable claw that touches the keyboard for me. That's the main tool I use. I joined a writer's office this couple months ago in New York, which is where I live, and it's a shared office space. You go in and there's a room just with the writer, totally silent, you can't talk. I intentionally use a computer without wireless internet because I find it really distracts you and is not useful for writing fiction. For writing journalism, which I do, or short humor pieces, which I also do, I can be, more in the world more so then, and often need internet or people around me, or need to talk on the phone to sources. But my main life is kind of divided up between working on this journalistic pieces, which I'll feel more connected to the world, and then getting into some kind of very private zone in this writer's office where I work on fiction.
Impact him in that short amount of time. Ultimately, do you feel like that was good for him or bad for him as he went back to Qatar?
I think any novel, especially a coming-of-age novel, which I think this is a variation on, it all makes you who you are, just like life does. And I think the good or bad, that's who you become. And I think he's learned something from his time in the U.S., maybe a little more cynical, but also more hopeful about certain things. I feel like he's ready to reconnect with his father in a way he wasn't before, and has a new life goal for himself and what he wants to do with his job.
How did his teaching, if at all, have an impact, his teaching and his students have an impact on the writing of Kapitoil?
I was teaching for about 2 years during the writing of it. Tremendous, I don't know about Kapitoil itself, but on my writing, very much so. I learned much more as a teacher of undergraduates at WashU in St. Louis than I did necessarily as a graduate student myself in the workshops. I think the cliche is true that when you teach something, you know it better than, I don't know what the cliche is, but you get the idea. There's something about learning and teaching.
It's there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's there. The question is, when Kareem is talking to Zahira about the father telling her, basically, to go to nursing school instead of her dream as being a scientist, why didn't Kareem stick up for her?
I think throughout the novel, he becomes this maternal surrogate for his sister, or in his life, not just before the novel as well. With his mother's death, he's become both a father to her, but also really a mother, because his father is so cold and aloof and unwelcoming towards her. Why doesn't he stick up for her? I think he, at some point, tries to draw the line and say she's her own person, and he knows he can't really win this fight. So, yeah, it's, again, another moment where he has this moral dilemma of what do you do, but I think he recognizes then she has to make her own choice. She has to do it on her own, and he can't continually fight her battles for her.
Intentional homage to Molly Ivins in the choice of the name Shrub.
A little, not Ivins herself. I've heard of that. But yeah, it felt like both a financial name. The word bush is in there. A shrub is also a bush, so yes. But I didn't want to make it too A equals A or anything like that, where it becomes like an equation to plug into. His first name is Derek, which is my legal first name is Derek. I've always been called Teddy. A little bit of a pun on like oil derricks, but also I like the idea. Everyone who writes books these days writes characters named after themselves, but they're always the heroes of the story, and I like the idea of maybe the villain could be named after me for once.
So how did Teddy come out of Derek, if you don't mind me asking?
It's my mom wanted a son named Teddy. They didn't want Teddy or Theodore in the birth certificate. It's a longer, worse story. Let's not go into it now.
Do we have? Yes, ma'am. The question is, why Jackson Pollock, since there are other abstract artists? Is that a favorite of Teddy's?
He very much goes against Pete Mondrian's painting. The other reason is I really don't know who the other abstract artists are. So Just went for the low-hanging fruit is what I tend to go for.
Yes, ma'am. Movie in the works.
I'm talking about it all the time. No one else is listening. There's been some bites from people, and things are in the works now, but nothing's been decided as of yet. Do you have a lot of money you want to spend on this? No? Okay.
Perhaps you'd like to make an investment. Who would you like to play the lead character in the movie?
There's the problem with it. There are not many well-known Middle Eastern actors, but let's go with Brad Pitt just because.
And why not? A likely choice. The name of the book.
It was originally Kapitoil with a C. The program idea came out there, capitalize on oil. I came up with the idea later on, about halfway through. It should be called with a K because he wants to name it after himself. Plus, it then plays off Karl Marx's Das Kapital a little bit more felicitously. So it was both the program itself, his name, and Marx.
Yeah, it definitely does not end the way you think it's going to end. That's for sure. So it was controversial in this lady's book club. She's asking, did he give up? What happened? What happened with the end?
What did you got? What was the I heard about the controversy. It made it back to New York.
Yeah.
By the way, that's all we were talking about last week. But can you tell me what people were thinking? Okay. It's okay. Security, can you remove this woman, please?
That's row B7, please.
Yeah.
So she felt like you just gave up. Like you could have really given a gift to the world, and you just gave up.
This is a problem. I should have really written this book better. A lot of people think that he just gives up. He's supposed to only be working for his father for a few months. It's in one sense there. He needs something to do before he starts school again. So it's a temporary stopgap solution. He'll eventually try to work on this program with Zahira. Sorry, can you say that?
He seemed like he was just rolling and ready to go. You know, he had the world on a string, right before him, and then he just gave it all away.
I mean, the bigger decision is to go against Shrub and to choose his father's values over Shrub's values and Qatar's home over U.S. values. But I think he's going to avoid a capitalistic enterprise in the future, do this epidemiology thing or something else, use his gifts for something altruistic, even if it means a great sacrifice both financially and personally.
Something I had been talking to someone about along those very same lines with the ending of the book is why didn't he just take the money and still go back to Qatar?
Another plot hole you guys are uncovering right now. Why would he do?
Sorry.
Yeah. Why would he do that? Because I'm trying to think on my feet right now.
Well, but in the end, it seemed a very Kareem-esque decision.
He wouldn't want to do that. He's a moral guy. That would be immoral. And this way he can preserve his legal, guilt-free conscience, I suppose, too. He's turning down Shrub. He doesn't even want this dirty money to him.
What does he think of Bend, and is this just the first stop on his tour of the Northwest?
It is my first trip up here. I'm going to Portland after this. If you have friends there, Portland State on Monday night. And I've liked it so far. Again, your weather is just transcendent. And I hear the skies will brighten just after I leave, which makes me feel good, too.
Welcome to spring in Central Oregon. Part of those 300 days of sunshine, right? Do we have some questions? I see someone in the back. This gentleman is a computer programmer, and he was really amazed by what Teddy did with this book. So you're wondering if Teddy is a computer programmer, had any information on that level, or how did you get that kind of information?
No, I mean, maybe in school, I'd done some very low-level programming in middle or high school. My younger brother is a neuroscientist who does a lot of computer programming, so I'd go to him and say, give me something that will look smart so a guy in Bend, Oregon will someday call me brilliant, totally unfounded with no evidence. So I'd literally have him email me something and say, use this kind of idea, put these words in, and he'd generate something, and I'd copy and paste it into the book.
Do we have any more questions?
I turned down very little.
So you're right. There were never any numbers mentioned as far as what Mr. Shrub was offering Kareem for Kapitoil. Can you help us out with that?
$8.12. But then my editor said, this doesn't look that impressive. I didn't want to have, deliberately didn't want to have a number in there. In 50 years, that number would look silly. And well, the U.S. will no longer exist in 50 years also, so there are other problems happening. But I feel when you see that in a book or movie, some number being floated, it feels very dated and also just feels too concrete and specific. And the important thing is it's a universally large, tempting figure that should float him for the rest of his life, but he's turning it down. But it was $1.2 million.
So there you go. Do we have anybody? Yes, ma'am. Julia, correct? Why did you choose the Beatles for the song that the mother would sing to him?
It felt like this universal music that anyone in the world can possibly get into. It would have actually reached Cutter in the 1970s or 80s, or she might have possibly had access to it, even though it might have been restricted. So it was an easy one to go for. But I also felt like it's a less complicated, at least in the stuff he's thinking about. It's British, for one thing. This book is his introduction to American culture. The Beatles, for all their brilliance, their lyrics are not generally, especially their earlier stuff, as complicated as, say, Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen. So he gets introduced to more complex forms of musical thought, but then returns to the Beatles and recognizes there is something magical and nuanced about them.
I'm glad actually that you brought up his mother, because that does play kind of an important role, I think, for Kareem in the book. And then his role, or his relationship then with his dad and with his sister. What do you feel like with regard to Kareem losing his mother at an early age and then, you know, trying to fill in the roles then for the dad and the sister?
My feeling was always that it had sort of stunted his growth. He's forever a 13-year-old in some ways. But in other ways, he's grown up tremendously and is very mature. So he's had to become a mother to Sahira, but has never really been a son because of that. He's never been able to mature and grow as a normal adult might develop. So it's this schism for him of great experience and maturity and serious pain, while also being a child still and needing some maternal figure himself. Rebecca at times sort of fluctuates between being a girlfriend or romantic figure and source of interest, and somewhat maternal source to him as well.
Do we have any questions, any final questions for Teddy Wayne? I want to make sure we don't leave any. He will be signing books after we're done, so you get some one-on-one time.
But
books will be available.
Not for that woman who didn't like the book.
That's right. Sorry. Kind of this whole row here is kind of cut off from the book. Yes, sir. So the question is, did Teddy intentionally write Kareem as the kind of American we wanted all Wall Street business people kind of molded into and to be?
I mean, I have friends who work in Wall Street, who work in finance. Maybe when I was younger, like a teenager, I would have been quick to judge someone who works in finance. And I think because you don't know reasons for why people do it. As you get older, you understand people's motivations are very complicated. Some people, that job editing application essays helped me too. Some people are really fascinated by the field, are stimulated by the world of numbers. Some people have to make money to pay off loans, to provide for their families. It's not just greedy Americans running amok on Wall Street. Is Kareem a model for them? I mean, I don't think many Wall Streeters are really reading this book. I don't think. No one besides you guys is reading, in fact. But sure, it'd be nice if people felt we're a little bit more thoughtful about, are they doing this for the right reasons? I think some of them are, actually. Some are doing it for, or at least reasons that are very justifiable. And it's not just, greed run rampant on Wall Street.
As an author, you mentioned that you kind of went to a point when you were writing this book thinking, is anybody going to read this book? When you go from that to seeing how your work affects people, what does that feel like for you as an author?
It is totally gratifying. It's going to sound corny, but you don't really expect people to read it in the first place. You don't expect them to like it, which that woman did not.
You're in for it. Sorry.
And you certainly don't expect something like this or all the events surrounding this novel idea selection. So I did expect quilts, though. And Yeah. That's, I mean, when you're growing up, you think, maybe I'll write a novel someday that will give me a quilt. And it came true.
You've seen the racquetball quilt.
I did. They're all amazing, but if you have not seen it, please go down to Quilt Works. And they're incredible and just amazing feats, and it took them a lot of hours, and I really enjoyed them.
Did it amaze you specifically with the quilts? Because I know that when I was looking at them, it was wonderful to see how someone would take one line from your book, or the line of a song that you used in the book, or a theme in the book, and create such a work of art. What was that like for you?
I'm a serious quilter myself, so it wasn't like I made some quilts on my own, just messing around. I did this too. No, it was a really creative expression of it. I would also welcome a film adaptation, but a quilt for now. Quilts are good.
I thought you had an investor over here.
Yeah.
We'll work on that afterwards,
I hope so.
right? Do we have any more questions for Teddy Wayne before we end this evening? Anybody else? I want to make sure I get everybody. All right, well, don't forget, he is doing that book signing immediately after with the books. Oh, one more. Is the book being translated into other languages and cultures, and how is that going?
Yeah, there's a French translation that came out last fall. The French really took to it much more than the Americans did. I don't know why, but a Spanish one's coming out at some point. A UK edition is the same text, obviously, but a UK edition came out. And I think we're working on others right now.
And again, watch for the film starring Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Potentially with Angelina Jolie. We'll have to see how that works out.
As I went through it, I was keeping a running glossary of substitutional words. So empty equals void, and I'd pay attention to this. I would sometimes write notes like, after the 5th chapter or whatever, now he uses the right word, so he starts learning it. So it was a running tally in a Word document. It probably grew to like 10 or 20 single-space pages by the end of it. And I would just go through it and decide, is this word something that feels mathematical or financial or technological or scientific? That would be a Kareem-esque word. So instead of turned, which is used a lot because you have to use it, I would have rotated, things like that. And it felt like a way to start peppering it and larding it with these words that are a little bit unexpected and defamiliarize your idea of what Kareem's language would be like. I'm working on a sequel. It's called K2 Kapitoil with a Vengeance. He comes back. He's angry. He's back for more. People ask me that frequently, and I feel like I wouldn't want to give a definitive answer. What I wrote was a book that ends with some closure. He's going home, but there's some things that are up for grabs, and it can flourish beyond the borders of the story. So it sounds corny, but I'd rather have the reader decide what happens until the sequel comes out, which will not come out. I'm writing a prequel. You discover Kareem's father is Darth Vader. And
I can't wait.
It changes
I will
everything.
Read that. Perfect. Do we have anybody from this side? This is a quiet side so far.
It was fun to spend 3.5 years with him. Yeah, I think had he been a less likable or interesting character to me, it would have been hard to continue working with writing about him for so long. So I did, and it's nice that people felt he's a lovable character at times. I tried to throw in a few flaws. He's not totally saintly at every moment, but he is certainly a very decent, earnest young man. I've finished the draft for a new one, having friends read it now. At this sort of larval stage, I don't want to talk too much about it, but I'm sure there's some similar thematic, emotional concerns. It's not set in financial world or anything like that. The character's a young boy who's narrating it. This book may be awful. I may not even write it, so let's see. But sometime in the next decade, look out for it.
Do you feel pressure, though, as an author, having your debut novel, well, yeah, clearly, but having your debut novel so well received? Do you feel a lot of pressure on that second book?
Literally now I hadn't thought about it until you just asked me.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry.
It's a tough one. I might just hang up my cleats and then call it a day.
So I'm known for the tough questions.
Yeah.
Well, we thank you so much for coming this evening. Can we hear it for Teddy Wayne?
Thank you. Thanks, Christy.